of cinnamon.
But it doesn't have to be on in here, right?
No,
Okay.
I assume you can all hear each other.
I think so. I'm able to project, right?
Yeah. Are you ready for me to send people?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We can't end unless we start. Mhm. Yeah. No, we've had, for the last number of years, it's been very easy. This is no fooling around. No fooling around. Are there? Oh, wow. Okay. Great. Okay. No, I don't know. I did shower this morning successfully with soap and water and everything.
No, you know what? This way they
Yes.
can see you a little
Yes.
bit better.
Soap and water and
Yes, you do. This one, they could,
when we're filming.
when we were
Yeah.
filming, because it
Became an
like
optical
was
illusion.
iridescent.
Hi.
Hi.
How we doing? It's a little.
You ready to go home?
It gets harder as the day goes on.
I'm sure it
Well,
does.
Yeah.
I want people to get to sit, we'll sit.
Well, then nobody will sit. Everybody will just.
Well, we'll bring
I
them here
understand.
and
I
have-
understand. So, but please take.
Let's have a second row.
Please step
Yeah.
back from the table.
Okay. as we have gathered, we have the opportunity to do a little study together. And this booklet comes from an organization called Hadar. Hadar is a pluralistic Jewish learning organization, institution. They now have a base here in Chicago as well, originally in New York. Rabbi Goldie Guy is the representative here in town. I believe she has a piece in here as well. It's really quite wonderful, and they put together each year a study guide. And I thought that for this year, as we prepare for the beginning of the new year, we would have an opportunity to at least study one, maybe two of the sections of this. It takes us all the way from Rosh Hashanah through Sukkot. So these will be yours to take and to continue to consider and to look at as we move through these days of awe. And what I wanted to do was to take a look at the very first section on page 2 of the page that's numbered 2. It's actually not the second page, but it's the page that's numbered 2. And you'll see, you okay?
Yeah.
Looking for a missing person.
Oh, never mind.
Ah, okay.
We found it.
They moved it back.
Ah, okay, all right, very good. And I invite you, before we begin, to join me either in the blessing for study, or at the end of the blessing, you can respond, Amen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So Rabbi Shai Held is actually the head of Hadar, of the Institute, and he wrote an article, a passage, a section, a text study that is titled "Being the Chesed We Pray For." And I like that he left the word chesed untranslated, because it is one of those words that is very difficult to translate. It is certainly multivocal. Oftentimes it is translated as grace, sometimes compassion. We know it probably most familiarly in the phrase gemilut chasadim, which we often translate as acts of loving kindness, which comes a little bit closer. We also know it from the name that's given to the group of Jews who call themselves Hasidim, right? And the whole idea with the beginning of the Hasidic movement was to bring the joy and love back into Judaism they felt that had been lost in the more pietistic approach to Judaism, the more legalistic approach, the more rationalist approach. And so they introduced more singing and dancing and joy into their lives and into their practice of Judaism, how they prayed certainly, but also in how they studied. And there are different groups, different Hasidic groups that continue to this very day. So chesed is, again, a multivocal word, and so he titles this "Being the Chesed We Pray For." That is, if we are praying for chesed, if we're praying for compassion, for grace, how do we embody that? How do we manifest that in our lives? And so I'd like to take a look at some of the texts that he brings forward. And I would invite someone who would like to begin reading at the very beginning, the prophet Joel.
The prophet Joel describes a great and terrible day of the Lord, when the enemies of the kingdom of Judah will be met with judgment and doom. On that day, declares Joel,
You can do the English, yeah.
Thank you. That wasn't really an option. Everyone who calls upon Yikra occasion one of the most famous and stirring comments in all of rabbinic literature. Attempting to understand the mandate in Deuteronomy to walk in God's ways, our sages invoke the verse in Joel and ask, confusingly, how is it possible for a person to be called by the name of the Lord?
Right. So this is a bit of an introduction. What is in how are we getting to this notion of chesed and what it means to be both in relationship with God and relationship with our fellow human beings? So continue with the stunning answer.
Their answer is stunning. Rather, as God is called merciful, so should you be merciful. As the Blessed Holy One is called compassionate, so should you be compassionate. As God is called righteous, so you too should be righteous. As God is called loving, so too should you be loving.
Right. And so in many cases, we may have run into this as imitatio Dei, right? Imitating God. That is, setting that as God as the example of how we should be in our lives. So that's what this particular passage is commenting upon, right? And so he continues, right, that there is something striking and anomalous about this text, right? The verse in Joel, as we have it, speaks of those who call upon the name of God, right? But our sages interpret it as if the verse spoke of those who are called by the name of God, right? So they're flipping it around a little bit. Emmy?
I'm not familiar with the term yikra.
Right. So likro is either to read or it can also be to call, right? So the book of Leviticus in Hebrew is identified as vayikra, meaning and God called, right? It is kol koreh bamidbar, a voice calls in the wilderness. So we have it often, but here it's flipping it around. Who is the subject, right? Is it being called by God or being called God? So that's what this particular passage is turning on, right? Other questions? So let's continue a little bit here, right? So it's a little bit of a confusing image, right? That is, that it seems in a sense quite blasphemous. I mean, not only are we not supposed to utter the ineffable name of God, Yod He Vav He, but to presume to be called God seems a pretty big leap here, and so that's a little bit what Rabbi Held is focusing on here in trying to unpack what is the meaning of this particular midrash in talking about the text, and what is it that it says to us today. Yeah, Stuart.
It just seems to me it's setting up a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
That is, the paradox is subject-object paradox.
Mm-hmm.
And if the subject is always God, and you are always the object, how do you talk about God? Well, Heschel argues that there's a presupposition that he converts the Copernican idea of you coming first. It says God comes first. That awareness of the subject comes first, and then you have the object. But to have that, there has to be something indwelling in the object that can have that awareness. And it seems to me that's the paradox
Mm-hmm.
that's being addressed here.
Yeah, good. Let's go a little bit further, okay? So here again, the question: how does we get to eliciting the idea that we emulate God by cultivating the virtues of mercy and kindness, right? How do our ancestors, how do the sages come to this, right? Is it just simply misreading the text or forcing the text and changing it and having it say something that they wanted to say, or is there something else going on here, right? It may be that they have another tradition, right? That Yikra and Yikare are spelled the same in Hebrew, only with different vowels, right? So we're playing around with the vocalization of this, which oftentimes happens within the rabbinic commentary, is, don't read it this way, read it this way. And part of the reason that we're able to do that is because we're working from an unvocalized text, right? And we're coming from an oral tradition, right? So we have this tradition of how we heard it, and then we only have the letters, we don't have the vowels, and so it gives a little bit of flexibility in how we can read it and how we can derive meaning from that same text, right? So let's right. So now he quotes from Eliezer Berkovitz, who offers a beautiful and far more interesting interpretation of what the Midrash is doing. In the process, it gives us something for the High Holy Days, something for us to latch onto. Berkowitz suggests, by reading the verses they do, our sages wanted to tell us that only one who is called by the name of God has the right to call upon the name of God, right? And in Hebrew, rak hanikra yikra, right? In other words, the only people who may truly pray for God's chesed are those who are themselves known for chesed. Only someone who embodies generosity has the right to ask the same from God. In order to receive chesed from God, we have to first embody it, or at least strive to embody it. Or perhaps we can say, and this is very much Held's view of this, we must be the chesed we pray for, right? To be the chesed that we pray for. And I've heard, and I think, Rabbi Heaps, I think I've heard it from you, be the change that you want. Is that? That's Gandhi. So, channeling Gandhi.
Wow.
Channeling Gandhi. But I must have heard you quote that, right? Yes. Awesome, right? So that same idea, right, and said not just in being the change, but being the chesed, being the generosity, being the love, and coming from this particular verse in Joel, that it is focusing on that idea. How can you ask for something that you're not willing to do yourself? Right. Comments, Randy?
There's a midrash that I heard about Irving. And Irving is a sinful man who, at Yom Kippur, starts a debate with God. And he says, God, look, yeah, I've done all these things, but look at all the terrible things you've done. And he elicits all these things, and he said, so how can you hold me accountable? You should forgive me, because nothing I've done has anyway compared with all these terrible things you've done. And there are two endings to it. The first one is God says, well, you're right, and I'll grant you forgiveness. The second one is, Irving, if you had asked for forgiveness for everyone and for others, I would have granted it. But you're only asking for forgiveness for yourself. And that selfishness is why I can't grant the forgiveness. And I've always thought that was kind of an interesting concept in relationship to this, because Irving was only concerned with his own. He wasn't concerned with, God, how can you hold all the Jewish people up or other people up?
Right. So yes, it's connected very much to this idea, right? So that if you're not willing to be that forgiving person and to elicit that in others, how can you expect to gain that forgiveness for yourself, right? And that part of that, and the oftentimes it's that particular story or stories like that are used to talk about the vidui that we do during the confessionals that we do during the High Holy Days, that it's always in the plural. We have, forgive us, forgive us, forgive us, and not so much. I mean, there are moments where we do have the personal confessional, but those are done silently, right? But for the most part, the majority of the time we spend together is praying together with one another and for one another, which is a very powerful thing in this. And I think that here, again, for me, it connects very deeply to this, what is the purpose of Torah? Right? What is the purpose of the stories that we have? What is the purpose of, and particularly this morning when we were reading the text from Nitzavim, and it's a double portion Vailech. We didn't even get to Vailech. We didn't even get very far in Nitzavim. We just started at the very beginning. But we'll have another opportunity at Yom Kippur morning to consider that text. But the idea that we're given choice in how to behave. We're given the instructions. We're given, this is how you do it. But more than that, not just the 613 mitzvot, but we're given the model. We're given the ideal. This is how you should be. and this is what you should aspire to. And when you do that, as you aspire to that, you are helped along the way, right? You're helped along the way. One of the things that I was talking to someone else about this the other day, in this, the Torah's focus on reward and punishment, right? Divine providence. And why do we even have that as part of it? You know, is that something that you really believe? Do you believe that God is, so I'll put it on myself. I don't believe that I'm that important, that God is paying attention to everything that I do, and when I do something for the good, I'm going to get an immediate reward, and if I do something that's not so good, that I will be punished. I don't think that the broken shoulder came as a punishment because I did something bad, and that God was zapping me in that way. But what it does give is it gives pause, right, to, well, what led to that, right? And how can I avoid that, if it is possible to avoid that in the future? What were my actions that contributed to this particular accident, if I can even discern that? And on the flip side of that, if something good happens, okay, let's take a look at that as well and see, how is it possible for me to repeat that? Is it possible for that to happen again, and maybe again and again and again? And what can I do to in my behavior to affect that? Anne?
It made me think of, which makes me feel, I'm so sad that I'm not teaching it anymore. But when I talked to the children, and we talked about what does it mean to be created in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would ask them, what do you think are qualities, what would you just imagine, they could start coming up with kindness and compassion, depending on the age of
Yeah.
vocabulary. And to be able to think that we all have that potential to be our best selves in all of them. And when we've talked about blessings or punishment, if you, and we know this as adults, and I think about it more from myself, but really what I would love teaching the children is you are rewarded because you feel so much better. People are not happy when they're mean. They're just not happy, right? So I say to the kids, if you're mean, you're not happy. And yet if you're kind and if you're patient and you are the reason someone smiles that day, that's the blessing, and that's being created in the image of God. So that we have that potential to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as I read number 49, thought, yeah, we should be all of those, we should try to be all of those qualities, because that's how we have reward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, good. Jerry?
If one of the attributes of God is compassion,
Hmm?
so where is the compassion in the becoming? We can't be that which we always want to be. But I think there's a sense of saying that there's a compassion that we need to have for ourselves, and not being the perfect one, the perfect thing, the perfect example of God. And that in our own compassion for our failures, I think that in a sense, I don't know, we don't know, but I would assume that there's compassion from the spirituality. It says also, the becoming is also part of the process. You can't be perfection before there's the fall and the struggle. And so it's a way of saying, at least for me, that you have to also be compassionate with yourself, to forgive yourself for those things that you're not marvelous at, and at the same time strive for that example that says, I need to become that which is great, but it takes a journey.
Right.
And it takes time.
Yeah, very much so. And I think I think that it's very much at the heart of what is what the sages are teaching, and what Rabbi Held is bringing forward, is the sense that it's not just how we behave towards others, it's how we are, right, or how we try to be in that way. And I think that it's also to add to what you just said, that it's also when bad things happen, because being a good person doesn't inoculate you against bad things happening, right? And they do happen. And you know, broke my shoulder. I can't tell you how many people have offered help, and Julie just was offering me wedge pillows, and I mean, just that people want to, and I think that if I was, a rotten, nasty human being, I wouldn't have that support. That Kathy continues to put up with me is more a testament to her than to me, but I think it's very much at the core of this, right? That if you want chesed, if you want that, be that, and so even when things are going very well, be that, and when things are not going so well, be that, and it is an ideal, and the expectation is we can't. If we set God as the goal, that's not gonna happen, right? But to continue to strive for that, right? Not to say, well, it's, I can't do that, so I'm just not going to try. But to continue to work towards that and hopefully get better and better at it, and not be deterred when we fall short. And that, again, is really the message of the High Holy Days, right? Is that all of us fall short, in one way or another, and we all, aspire to do better in the coming year than we did this past year, no matter how good or bad that year was. We want to do better, and not to be deterred, and not to feel like, well, that was as good as it's going to get, and I've done all I can do, and I'm done. And the truth of the matter is, you're not done. You continue to work towards it, and even God is portrayed, and I think that's the genius of Torah, as learning along the way, right? Learning more about human beings and what's necessary, and kind of providing that model also, not only of how to be chesed, how to show chesed, but also what it means to be disappointed and be frustrated and be angry and still be connected. And how important it is to have checks and balances when God is crazy angry at the Israelites, Moses steps in. And when Moses is crazy angry with the Israelites, God steps in. And just kind of modeling that and really putting it into language that we can understand. And it's not that God is imperfect, and I'm not suggesting that at all, but the portrayal, the stories, and the way that we have this scripture is to encourage us and to say, this is real, and this is how it can unfold, and that ultimately we continue to have the ability to choose, and hopefully we make better choices, and as we move forward, as we learn, and as we grow. Yeah, Jerry.
It just occurred when the children created the golden calf, and Moses comes down, and God is angry, and God wants to destroy the people. And so Moses intervenes. It took a human being to change the anger of God, so to speak, and not destroy the people. So in a certain way, that's a goal in its own way. That's an image that we already have, that we have the power to be able to deal with that spirituality, that we can change the outcome by the good deeds that we do, by the choices we make, actually can change perhaps the outcome. And that's the whole idea of polydry, is that it's a trial in the sense that you're bringing the world on trial. You bring people to say, how can we make the world a better place by being concerned, by being part of the change, and being aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Emmy?
Well, that's the literature too, the High Holy Days, of saying we can change the city decree by repentance and those kinds of things. So this answers your particular comment too.
Right. Julie, yeah.
I had a thought having to do with the original idea of this reflection of God and people, and the idea that the oneness, the unity of God. We're challenge because we have our individual impulses and natures and strengths and weaknesses. And like we were talking this morning about the problem with if the reeds don't all stand together, if there are gaps and weaknesses, we fall.
Mhm.
And so ultimately the idea of each person improving themselves is actually, it's not just improving yourself, it's that you're able to strengthen yourself or grow so that you actually are helping other people be strong so that you can all stand together in unity. I think it's a really, it's like, it's personal and it's, I don't want to say universal, it's personal and it's communal
Mhm.
simultaneously.
Yeah, 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 very much so. And that's, it touches not explicitly on the idea in Musar where we're to continue to work on ourselves, not just to work on ourselves, but to make the community better, right? Building a better me so that I can build a better world is the whole idea, and focusing on these different attributes and trying to really manifest them and bring them into balance in a way that certainly helps us, but if it only helps us, right? I mean, that's the Hillel, right? If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Right? It's that whole notion of, yes, you've got to work on yourself. You've got to become a better version of yourself as much as you can in the cycle of each of the years that we go through, and to the end of not just, the goal is not just to be a better person. The goal is to be a better person that has the impact and can then be a part of making the community better, bringing blessing into the world, right? And that's, again, this idea of chesed. Good. Other thoughts? Yeah, Jerry?
Just an example, we all have an example from children. How does a child walk? Walking is the process of falling and recovering,
Mhm.
falling and recovering. So from the first moments when a child learns to deal with this world, it begins with a fall and a recovery. And perhaps that's the model that we need to realize, that before we recover, we have to fall a little bit, and then we recover and we fall. And with each step, we move forward, or perhaps if you're looking backward, you're doing that in reverse, you're going backwards. So it depends on which direction you're going in terms of where you're walking.
Yes. Stuart?
Jerry, it seems to me that's exactly what the Torah tells us. From the very beginning, there's a fall. And there's fall after fall after fall after fall. So I think your point's well taken. I think also there's a dimension here, we're talking about the communal, and it certainly is there. But to me, one of the most interesting and important words in the entire Torah, and it appears over and over again in the Torah and the Bible, is inane. And it's part of the high holiday liturgy as well. And it just seems to me that there's that notion of that relational call, so that we're doing all these things to try and improve ourselves, and at the same time reach out to others and improve our world. But we're doing it also because we're called to do it, not simply because it's spontaneous, but there's a call. All these prophets, Joel included, answered inane, sometimes not very happily, but they answered nonetheless.
And the call, and that leads us to the second piece that I wanted us to look at on page 22, is that we seem to always be engaged in somewhat, or at least I would call it, in this game of hide and seek, right? That we are continually looking for the divine, looking for the divine in ourselves and others in the world, trying to capture that experience, and of being a little jealous of ancestors, at least in the description in the Bible, who have, direct, unambiguous experiences of the divine in their lives, whether it's through a voice, through a dream, through an experience, that it's clear that they are connected to God and speaking to God, encountering God in a very, very direct way. We don't necessarily have access in the same way, or we wouldn't necessarily describe our experiences in that way. I won't speak for everybody, I'll speak for myself. I don't necessarily have access in that way. I think if I stood up in front of the congregation and said, you know, I was talking to God the other day, and God said to me that from now on, we're going to do X and not Y. And because X is a much better way to go, and I know this because God told me. And I'm pretty sure that the response would be similar to this response here. There would be some, a little bit of laughter, a little bit of wonder, a little bit of concern.
Very good psychiatrist.
That, you know, did you just fall on your shoulder or did you fall on your head as well? And so we don't have that. And just of this continually seeking and searching, and it is an eternal search. Stuart, you had referenced Heschel, right? So man's search for meaning, man in search for God, and so that it is this quest that we are embarking upon, and it's not just a quest because that's the goal, but to really seek to understand and seek to know what it is that we are supposed to be doing, and how do we connect in a way that is meaningful, powerful, that is fulfilling, and that is enriching, right?
I find there's kind of a, is it ironic or it's a paradox though? Just as the point that, you know, you can't say, oh, God spoke to me and told me to do this and that. But on the other hand, we're always talking to God. I mean, we're always talking to God, aren't we? We're invoked to do it on a regular basis. So in some way, we're still believing that He is actually listening to individually to each of us, even if He's not going to necessarily speak directly to us in the way that you described. So how are we're doing it and not doing it, we're believing it and not believing it simultaneously.
So it calls to the question of what is the prayer that we engage in on the High Holy Days, is that do each of us experience that as talking to God, right? I'm not sure that that's true. I'm not sure that every one of us would say that in prayer, yes, when I'm reading these words, singing these words, when I'm hearing these words read, when I'm hearing these words sung, that I feel that's communication to God. For some, it is, but I think for many it's not.
Maybe that goes back to, there's a limitation of our language, but then going back to the original concept of Chesed transcends language, doesn't it? Because if we're talking about the heart as opposed to the head, then...
So I don't know if it necessarily transcends it. It challenges us to try and communicate exactly what it is. And we have that with Hebrew, we have that with English as well, right? Kath?
I was just going to argue with you.
Oh, good.
Because I learned in Sunday school with Anne that there seems to be this fear of talking about God. So I think it's cynicism that keeps you from saying, I spoke to God and I discovered this. So I don't agree with you that we don't have a connection today like our ancestors did then. I don't think we talk about it in the way that it's written by man in the Torah. Because I think there's a lot of cynicism, and people would look at you like you fell on your head. But I don't agree. I think whatever personal conversation I have or direction I take in life, I can attribute to something, a higher being in me, and see it as personal. Much like this, it could be a burning bush. It could be something.
Yes. Yes, and I don't disagree. And I think that I perhaps stated it in too extreme a way. I spoke about it too extremely in that way. And that I think that it is the experiences that are described in the Torah are not necessarily the experiences that we have today. And that I would say, more to the point, that when Abraham sends his servant Eliezer out to find a wife for his son Isaac, he does so with very little instruction. And we read about Eliezer asking for a sign. And it wasn't necessarily that he engaged in a dialogue with God, but he asked for a sign, a particular sign, and the sign that he asks for, that the woman that he meets will offer me water and then offer water for the camels that I have, that I'll know that that's the right person to bring home for Isaac, right? And then he goes to the well, and that's exactly what happens, right? So he experiences this as, this is a sign from God. This is what I was asking for. And somebody else might describe that same experience of, well, this is a smart guy, and he understands that somebody who is kind and compassionate and immediately offers water to a stranger, and not only to the stranger, but also to the 10 camels that drink a lot of water, and it's more than just a passing act of kindness. It's really an effort that's the kind of person that would be a good person for Isaac as a companion, as a partner. So yes, I think that it. I don't know that I would describe myself as cynical. I hope I'm not cynical. But I think that it's very much that we have different ways of talking about that, right? So my Baptist friends will talk about praying on something and receiving the answer to their prayer. I might talk about it differently. I might talk, I thought about this a lot. I talked to some friends. I did a little research, and it took me a long time. And then all of a sudden, it became very clear to me what the answer was, right? We might be talking about the same process, but understanding it a little bit differently. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily negating a higher power or negating the presence of God in that moment. It is how we talk about it and how we feel comfortable talking about it. And so I think you're right. I don't think that we talk about God in the same way and talk about our belief in God or the challenges that we have in believing in God in the same way. And I agree. I think there needs to be more of that. And I think these are the pieces that enter into it. And it is a little bit of a hide and seek with ourselves and hide and seek with God as well. Yeah.
Well, as Reformed Jews particularly, I think we're very uncomfortable with God talk. It's like separation of church and state. Let's not talk about God. If you came in, and I was thinking, if you came in and said, God spoke to me and said we should do this, you're right, everyone would be like, oh my God, are you okay? But if you came in and proposed, that's right, we do talk about God that way. But if you came in and said, I've done a lot of thinking, and I've really considered this, and I've become convinced that the right thing for this congregation to do is X, whatever X is, I think people would be very accepting of that because the language would be language that we're comfortable with. I've worked in a lot of Christian organizations, and particularly in a lot of African American organizations where God talk is very, very present and very kind. It took me a long time to be comfortable with, phone messages that ended with "and God bless" or "have a blessed day." But I think we need to be maybe not so scared of talking about God and acknowledging God. And I think we interpret, I feel sometimes very connected, and I don't usually use the word God, but to a spiritual connection. And I have it at certain moments. And am I communicating with God? I tend to think of it as a force greater than myself, because I don't have a conception of God which involves the mouth and dialogue in the same way. But so I think some of it is you could come in and tell us that You know, you might be thinking in your head, God told me this is the way to go. But we would tend to believe you if you just told us that this is, you know, there still might be discussion that this was, you know, you've really thought about this and this is the right thing to do and this is what we need to do as a caring, whatever. You know, I'm trying to imagine what the commandment might be.
So let me bring this to a close. We have some Nash and then worship together, and bringing it back to this past week's Torah portion, Nitzavim, which has the passage that, you know, this thing that God is commanding us is not so difficult. It's not so far away. We shouldn't. And the punchline is Lo Bashamayim Hi, right? It's not in the heavens. And there's that wonderful story, Talmudic story, about Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Eliezer, who are engaged in an argument, a debate about whether or not an oven that has been cracked, a clay oven that has been cracked, can be rendered kosher again, fit for use again. And Rabbi Joshua is taking the negative stance, and Rabbi Eliezer taking the positive stance, and they're arguing back and forth. And Eliezer says, you know, if the law is according to me, let the carob tree prove it. And they look out the window, and the carob tree jumps, 300 cubits from its place where it was rooted to a new place where it gains its rooting. And bless you, Rabbi Joshua says we don't learn Torah from carob trees. And Rabbi Eliezer gets a little frustrated and says, okay, then let the stream outside prove it. And the stream reverses its flow. And he says, we don't learn Torah from a stream. And then it says, well, let the walls of the synagogue prove it. And the walls of the synagogue start to cave in. And at this point, Rabbi Joshua's had enough of this and says, stop, you don't have authority in this argument to the walls. And the walls, out of deference to both of the teachers, remain kind of at an angle. And there's a legend that you can find this Beit Midrash, this house of study, to this day with the walls like this. And then finally, we'll let the heavens declare it. And this bat kol, this heavenly voice, comes out and says, well, what are you doing? Don't you know the law always follows this rabbi? And Joshua says, we don't listen to divine voices any longer. And he quotes Lo Bashamayim, it's not in the heavens. And so this is a case where Elijah later on is asked, in the journeys that Elijah makes back and forth between heaven and earth, what was God's response to this? And Elijah said, at that point, God was laughing, saying, my children have defeated me. And that the point of this is that once the Torah is in our hands, it's up to us to interpret and to learn from it and to put it into action, that we don't wait for instruction from the heavens to do that, or some kind of supernatural occurrence to prove that we've been given everything that we need. It doesn't mean that God is gone, but that certainly we shouldn't rely on those kinds of signs and omens and wonders that our ancestors relied upon, and they weren't all that effective. I mean, it had some immediate impact, but it was more of a, what have you done for me lately? Because the miracles we know had a very time-limited effect on our ancestors and their behavior. So thank you for the opportunity to do a little study in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. These are yours. Please take them. There are extra copies too. If you know somebody that you would like to share this with, please do so as well. Out in the lobby, there's a little nash, I believe, yes? There's a little nash, and we're going to gather back in here at 8 o'clock and continue with our worship of Selichot. We'll start with Havdalah, and then go making the separation between Shabbat and the new week, and we'll go forward from there. Thank you. Baruch Tiyah.
I just keep thinking of Coco.
just want to give you a heads up. And I go, what do I do about that?
How long can you give the energy?
It's just too bad that, you know, she's not here. with us anymore.
Do you say this is special? We just did what's it?
Yeah, so I bet we can do whatever you
Test 1 2, check 1 2. Test 1 2, check check.
So, I was telling Coco Golf this interview after she won. She won US Open in tennis, 19 years old. And they said, what, you know, when you with a lot of faith, what did you play? What did you play? And you won? She said, no, I played better to do my best. And I like that. So I'm that's going to be my new thing. Not my new thing.
We invite you to come in to join and set your mood for our Selichot service. If you would like a little bit of extra reading light, the lights in the middle and farther forward are definitely on. And we'll begin with our separation between Shabbat and the rest of the week with Havdalah on page 100. Yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai dai yai dai dai yai dai yai dai dai yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai dai yai dai dai yai dai dai yai dai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai dai yai dai dai yai dai dai yai dai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai dai yai dai dai yai dai yai dai dai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai yai dai 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 yai dai dai yai dai dai yai dai yai dai dai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol hamavdil ben kodesh Eliyahu hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu hagiladi, bimheira veyamenu, Yavo elenu, Imoshiach ben David, Imoshiach ben David, Eliyahu hanavi, Eliyahu hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu hagiladi. Shavuatov, 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 a good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. Our liturgy and this season calls us to return. Hashivenu, to return to ourselves, to return to our goodness, to return to the people we know we can be. Page 104. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, Chodesh, Chodesh, Yameinu Kikedem. Return again, return to the land of your soul. Return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to what you are. Return to who you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn and return again. Return again. Return to the land of your soul. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, Vina Shuva, Vina Shuva, Chodesh, Chodesh, Yameinu Kikedem. Page 106. We read responsively. The psalmist sang, "At midnight I rise to give thanks and praise." And so we come to this hour of Selichot under the canopy of night to celebrate goodness, to proclaim what is right and true, to praise, to thank, to bless the great giver who gives and renews our lives. We turn to loved ones, to friends, and to our people everywhere, the whole house of Israel. And our hearts turn toward the human family. We pray for its healing. Yet hardest of all is the inward gaze, the return to ourself, the honest reckoning of the soul, cheshbon hanefesh. We ask how to account for selfish acts, lies, and senseless anger, how to account for the shadows, the storms, the bitterness in our lives, the damage and distress we cause, how to own up to it all and find our way back with integrity and peace. We ask, have we the will to change? And if not now, when? This ceremony of Selichot is really the beginning of our high holiday season. And we mark that beginning with a change, a hopeful change for ourselves, but a change in our space, the place that we find our most holy. And so we change the symbol of our tradition from the colorful Torah covers that we have throughout the year into the white, the pure versions that we hope to aspire to and become our reminders during this season. I invite our Torah cover changers to come forward as we sing the Psalm of Elul, Psalm 27 on page 108. Please rise as you are able.
Achad
Page 113. We are taught, days are scrolls, write on them only what you want remembered. But we remember our weakness, and our days bear the mark of all that went wrong. On this night, we have hope in the one who sustains us. Together, though we stumble and falter, you promise forgiveness. If we stray from the truth, you do not forsake us. If we sink to the depths, your mercy uplifts us. If our urges betray us, your compassion is endless. If we distance ourselves, you do not disdain us. If we abandon your teachings, still you embrace us. If we seek you sincerely, your presence surrounds us. If we pray from the heart, you listen with yours. Though we stumble and falter, we are blessed by your promise. Page 123. Page 127. As the days of awe near, we reach for the infinite. Mindful of our frailty, we seek the holy. Despite our mortality, we carry within us the Ancient of Days. Despite loneliness within, we sense that we belong to a single soul, a spirit that fills the entire universe. Let us find that in that universal spirit, a new source of strength and significance, more compassion, more generosity, more gratitude for life. Let our hearts be open to self-reckoning. And may we grasp how vital to our lives is tshuva, the path of return. On this night of forgiveness, we confess our wrongs and take account of sins, failures of judgment, weakness of will. The hour is late, our need to be forgiven, profound.
Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, tavo lefanecha הזיפנים וכשעורף לומר לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו צדיקים אנחנו ולא חטאנו
Page 128. Page 130. We read together in English. For these sins, O God, we ask forgiveness. The ways we have wronged you under duress and by choice, the harm we have caused in your world deliberately and by mistake, the ways we have wronged you openly and secretly, the harm we have caused in your world consciously and unconsciously, the ways we have wronged you by hating without cause, the harm we have caused in your world through gossip and rumor, the ways we have wronged you through selfish or petty spirit, the harm we have caused in your world by hardening our hearts. For all these failures of judgment and will, O God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, lead us to atonement.
We continue with Vial Kulam.
Page 131. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha. We read responsively. We stray and we sin. When we fail to make peace the higher good, and when we are silent in the face of evil, when we forsake those who suffer far away, and when we shun the wronged and destitute among us, when we diminish God's image through violence or indifference, and when we fail to take care of those who depend on us, when we engage in slander or deceit, and when we distort the truth for personal gain, when we judge others rashly or unfairly, and when we stoke the fires of communal strife, when we fail to embrace Torah, the tree of life, to walk its paths and make its ways our own. We stray and we sin. When we offer no blessings, no words of thanks for the breath within us and for the wonder of being. Page 134, Shema Kolenu.
וקבל ברחמים, ברחמים וברצון את
Page 138. Walk with me into the woods, leave the edge of the forest behind. Come deep into the green until the shafts of sunlight are lost. Feel the stillness of the center. Walk with me to the top of the hill, leave the broad path behind, up beyond where the trees own right path, with the echoes of the blasts of the shofar, with the stillness of the center, with the help of God. Page 140, at the bottom. Avinu Malkeinu, almighty and merciful, we come before you without pretense. Avinu Malkeinu, we are reaching toward you. Help us to find you. Avinu Malkeinu, strengthen for us the holy days that lie ahead. Avinu Malkeinu, be with us as we strive to heal ourselves and become whole. Avinu Malkeinu, help us to repair a broken world. Avinu Malkeinu, hasten for us the days of redemption. Page 141. Please rise as you are able.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu v'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu v'anenu, ki ein banu masi. Asei manu. Asei manu, tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, chonenu v'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu, chonenu v'anenu, ki ein banu masi.
Each of us has the tunes that sound like the high holidays to us. Whether it's an Eitz Chaim or an Avinu Malkeinu, each of us has that sound that resonates through us. But for each of us, the sound of the shofar is the sound that calls to us throughout this season and indeed throughout the year. And so as we come to the conclusion of our Selichot service, we let that shofar sound, that call of Tikiyah, Shvarim, Truah, we let that sound be our last sound, and perhaps the sound that we most need to hear. No words necessary, no instruments, just the sound that calls to us, for us to be our best selves and to meet this moment of our high holiday season. In English on page 141. Together we read, Avinu Malkeinu, almighty and merciful, hear our voice. Avinu Malkeinu, we have strayed and sinned before you. Avinu Malkeinu, have compassion on us and our families. Avinu Malkeinu, halt the onslaught of sickness, violence, and hunger. Avinu Malkeinu, halt the reign of those who cause pain and terror. Avinu Malkeinu, enter our names in the book of lives well lived. Avinu Malkeinu, renew for us a year of goodness.
Tekiah.